Good afternoon. This is the agenda review meeting on May 18th in preparation for our commission meeting on May the 21st. I am dialing in from a very remote location today. So, Mr. Peterson, we'll turn it over to you as we go through our agenda.
Okay. If you would, does anybody have any specific questions about anything? Maybe that'd be a good place to start and make sure we can get those answered early.
Pete, just from a logistics standpoint, on the resolutions and presentations, how will we handle the recognition of the 2020 Employee Scholarship recipients?
That would just be a matter of recognizing those folks, and I'm sure they'll be dialed in, and we will just recognize them and make note that they have been selected to receive employee scholarships. And I would point out that that scholarship fund is funded by 100% by employee donations. There's no city funds involved in that. That's employees taking care of employees' children, and we'll do it that way. The same with the.
Yeah, I thought usually there's another staff person who makes those presentations. So I just didn't know if they were going to do that this year. I don't know if it's Beth or Keisha or someone else who's
we can do that. Sure, we can do that.
Isn't that the way it's usually done?
Yes, ma'am, you're right.
Because
yes,
it's an employee program, and I think that'd probably be stronger if they did that.
Yes, ma'am. Any questions about anything in particular?
When we get down to ordinances and all, I definitely have some questions. Let me kind of get through the consent agenda. Is there anything on the consent agenda anyone would like some further discussion on?
No.
And Pete, you and I also talked on Friday about whether we needed to go ahead and extend our state of emergency. Given that some additional thought, I noticed on the governor's resolution and what he's doing. What did you decide on that?
Sonny is working on that. Initially, it doesn't look like that there's any need for us to do that as far as receiving federal funding and whatnot. It appears as though that the governor's declaration would cover us, but I've asked her to double check on that, and she should have something for me tomorrow.
Okay.
I would want to make one note on your beer license application for the Kenjo Market number 51. This is going to be approved contingent upon receiving a health department inspection and completion of the purchase agreement. This is a company that is looking to buy an existing convenience store down on the very south end of the city, down at the Okolona exit. It's an existing business, and they have an agreement to purchase that business if they can get a beer license, and they can't get a beer license until they get health department inspection, and they're not going to close on the real estate transaction until they get the beer license. So it's almost a self-imposed catch-22 with the purchaser, but what we're recommending is they meet all of the building inspections and the background checks and all those types of things. So what we are recommending is approval contingent upon the completion of the sale and the health department inspection. And once that happens, they'll be eligible to come in and get their business license. They just want to make sure they can get a beer license prior to completing the sales purchase or the purchase of the property.
I got just a couple of questions on the consent agenda. With 6.1.1, I think we've talked about that, but tell me again how that those decisions are made in the local government support grant.
Okay. That is part of what is currently in the governor's budget. and we're eligible for $1.5 million. It cannot be used for recurring costs or personnel costs. It's really designed to help with the acquisition of capital equipment or to help fund capital projects. And what we have will be applying for is the $1.5 million. And what we have built into the budget and are recommending that money would be used to acquire a new pumper for the fire department, 10 cars for the police department, 10 or 11 cars at the police department, and school buses. And this, we are behind on keeping our fire department equipment replaced. Pretty much the same thing with police cars, and the buses that we would be taking out of service are ones that the state's going to require us to take out in this upcoming year.
So we were going to have to do that anyway. So does this change anything in our, I know this is capital, it's not operating, but does that change anything in our budget for next year in a positive way?
No, sir. We have built the budget around receiving this $1.5 million and have budgeted it to be spent in the way that I just described.
Okay.
Now, the thing we all need to be aware of, the legislators are going back to Nashville June the 1st to work on the budget some more. And there's a projected $1 billion shortfall in next year's state budget. And I think this is a total of $200 million worth of grant funding statewide. So we're going to make application, and we're going to pray and be hopeful that it stays in the budget after the legislature deals with it in a couple of weeks. And if not, then we'll have to go back and amend our budget and either take fund balance and fund this equipment or defer this equipment for a year, one or the other.
Okay. The only other question I have on, go ahead, John.
Go ahead, you finish yours.
All right, one more question, just as a suggestion, when you get to the bids aspect on the play area at King Commons Park, it might be a good opportunity to sort of get an update on the whole sesquicentennial legacy project and where we stand with everything. And also if there was any kind of pictorials that we could see with what we are looking at with this bid. I think there's a lot of interest there.
Yes, sir. I will have Phil ready to do that.
Great, thank you.
On that same subject,
In reference to that,
we only got 2 bids out of 19 that we sent out, and that's very disappointing.
There aren't a lot of people that do wooden playground equipment. There is different philosophies about the durability of wooden playground equipment and the ability to keep graffiti and those types of things removed from it. So there's not a lot of people that sell or represent companies that sell wooden playground equipment. So it's a fairly unique item. I had the same comments and questions. And now this is just the equipment. There will be a forthcoming bid for approval that will deal with the artificial surface that goes underneath the playground equipment. That's probably another 3 or 4 weeks out before we get those back.
I mentioned, or I think you mentioned in reference to the grant, a pumper truck, and I'm going to beat Joe to the question, is there no need for a ladder truck?
We can't afford a ladder truck in this budget cycle. There's a need for a ladder truck, but we're just altering the rotation a little bit.
Okay. And then the wooden, is it actual wooden? Because I thought Mr. Ellis had mentioned a concrete wood looking product for the playground.
He did,
And,
and what was decided upon in bid was the wood product, and that's the bids that we received. Yes, sir.
And that was I think the Sesquicentennial Commission and subcommittees and everything felt strongly about that. I think that's where that came from.
Yes, sir.
okay, I didn't know. Thanks.
Yeah, can you go ahead and catch us up? What is the new timeline on the natural playground, and then the reconciliation for the History Plaza? You know, how's that being approached?
I can't answer that. I'll have to get Phil to give you that answer on Thursday. Our crews are over there building sidewalks and doing those types of things right now. Once you approve this bid, if it's like most playgrounds, it's probably 8 to 10 weeks before you get the equipment in. But that's just a guess. Let me get Phil to give you the information as it is from the providers.
I'm sure it'd probably be good for the Sesquicentennial Commission that they get an update, maybe a written update, so they know where we are on this,
Sure.
particularly since we'll be voting on the bid Thursday.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks.
If there's no questions, more questions on the consent agenda, I'd ask maybe Dr. Calhoun about this annexation request and what went on to cause a split vote on the Planning Commission. You're on mute.
You talking about? Yeah, I got it. Are you talking about the 7.1?
The one that I don't know how to say.
Nectal.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Snitzel.
Yeah, that is an annexation that is basically, it's between two subdivisions that are both in the city. And I think it's about 5 parcels of land. And I think there's a actual communication from the requester. These are like 2-acre lots. And this family wants to be annexed mainly to be able to access the city school system. And they had already investigated the opportunity to pay tuition, and that didn't work out except for Science Hill. The question, and I think the reason that it was voted down, I think it was what, 6-3 or 5-3, was the water's already there, but the sewer lines would cost, I think, in the neighborhood of $57,000, if I'm remembering correctly. The taxes were about $1,700 a year, and doing that math, it just didn't make a lot of sense. It was recommended by staff to go ahead and do it, and then there was a lot of conversation about, well, this individual doesn't really want the sewer line, and is okay with that being put in some kind of recognition of it being 10 years from now, that he would be fine with it even then, because it's going to be costly to him to hook on to the sewer line. And I think there was concern about the spot annexation of parcels. There's a parcel of land in front of it that could be something sometime. And I think, I don't want to speak for the staff, but staff was saying this just gives us an opportunity for the others to be annexed. And it's quite simply, they're wanting to access the city's school system, and they are not interested at this point in time in extending the sewer. And there was somebody representing water sewer that said basically this was they could do it. They could do it in 5 years or 10 years. It really wouldn't be that big of a problem. But I think the spot annexation and the $1,700 versus $57,000 were the things that gave a number of members of the Planning Commission heartburn.
May I ask a question then?
Sure.
Pete, I remember when I was on planning, we would deal with annexation requests fairly regularly, where a part of the annexation and the plan of service would be a disclosure that it's like, you're going to be on city water, but you're not going to be on city sewer, or, allowed the plan of service to stipulate what you might not get. I think we had somebody wanting the annexation who wasn't getting some of those things a while back, but that was the way the plan of service went. Is that not a correct recollection on my part?
Well, you have to, if we annex the property, you have to make available all services to that property that are available to all other properties in the city. You just don't have to do it immediately. If this property owner is amenable and will agree to the plan of services to bring them sewer services in not to exceed 10 years, for example, and I think that's about the timeline they're talking about, then you approve the plan of services with those conditions, and everybody understands that that there's no commitment on our part to extend sanitary sewer any sooner than that.
So you can't just not do, you do have to commit to it happening at some future point.
Correct.
Is that the change?
We were told that it was that something had changed where we couldn't just say, we're not going to give you any services. Because I think that had occurred in the past. But
Yeah, bugaboo. We talked about that one.
Yeah.
Within the past 18 months.
right. But we were told that, no, you can't do that. Now you have to provide them the services, but you don't have to provide it like right now. Pete, has there been some kind of law change or ordinance change from a state or national or whatever that caused that?
Not that I'm aware of, Commissioner. I forgot the details of the situation over on Bugaboo. I think that water's available in the street, but it was a matter of a couple of 1,000 feet of water line back to the house or something. Let me double check with Tom, but there hasn't been any statutory change that I'm aware of. So I'll check with Tom on that one and get the details. The other thing to remember on this annexation, there's 2 or 3 other properties that would have access to this sewer line if it's extended. So there's a possibility that extension cost number could be divided by 3 or 4 rather than just all of it being dependent and driven on one property.
All right. Any other questions on that? So really our decision is whether we want to go ahead and invest in the sewer extension at some point in time, considering the fact that it may open up other annexations and other properties in that area's access to sewer.
And I would add to that, Mayor, you get property taxes. You also get the BEP funding that comes from the state of Tennessee for each child, which I think is about $6,500 a head on an annual basis.
There's 3 of them, right?
That I'm not sure.
Just in that household, I think there are. Yep. Okay.
If we
Who voted
if we do,
on the planning? Who voted against it? I'm trying to find the minutes and I don't see them in here.
I can't recall. I'd hate to use names that I know that I voted for the annexation and I was in the minority. And I'm sorry, I just can't recall who the others were. I'll have that available, or I can get that for us on Thursday.
Okay.
if we do pass that, do we need to amend where we're not doing the sewer, just add that in to this? So that within the next 10 years, we'll take care of the sewer?
That would be part of the plan of services, yes, but the date that as to when the sewer would be extended, yes, sir.
Is 10 years the max? Or is that just an arbitrary number we pulled out?
I use
I'm just
that
asking
number
that.
because somewhere in this packet, I was thinking that somebody had mentioned 10 years. I don't know that
Yeah,
there
no
is a
problem.
number required.
I think it's arbitrary because somebody mentioned 20. So I mean, the numbers were thrown around in basically saying we don't have to do this right now. Let's just say we're going to do it in 5, 10, or 15 or 20 years. So I think it's up to us, but I believe the letter of the requester made the 5 to 10 year comment, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, I was just curious where that number came from.
5 to 10 years is in the letter, commissioners.
Okay, are there any of the other ordinances on first reading? We've got a bunch of them here that we have questions about.
Mayor, let me make just another comment about, I mean, the 7.4 was pretty straightforward because that's property. The alley's running right through two people's property, including almost into their garage, and it just needs to be cleaned up. The 7.5, there was a lot of, a number of comments about the State of Franklin and Sunset area, and that one may take a little time in having staff explain the reasoning behind that, because I think that it was staff initiated, and there was not, there was a lot of difficulty in contacting the owners and getting them to respond, and we asked it to go back to, work harder to get a response from the owners, and they basically never did respond. So and I'm sure on when we have the public comment, there'll be some comments about that particular one. And then we've already heard about 7.7 and the veterinarian offices. I think that there's Pete, just help me there. I think this needs to be cleaned up, because we have some veterinarian offices that are in locations in zoning that it really doesn't fit. Is that accurate?
That is correct. I think there are veterinary hospitals and clinics that are currently in B3 and B4 zoned areas across the city, and past interpretations have been made that those were professional office uses and clinics, and the strict interpretation of clinic in our zoning ordinance references only working on humans. I have probably made a couple of those previous determinations 25 years ago when I worked back there. I think you could legitimately say that a veterinary clinic is a professional office, but in order to really clean it up and get it to where there's without any doubt, by amending B3 and B4 and B5 to allow veterinary clinics / animal hospitals, really cleans it up, and it will make it much easier to interpret going forward. It also gets all of the existing clinics into conformance with current zoning.
And I think I'm correct in there's some interest in someone locating an animal clinic inside the city limits.
In Gray.
Yes, sir.
Right. Which this has to happen before that can happen,
Yes, sir.
supposedly.
Can we go back to State of Franklin, the west side of State of Franklin, that is B4. The right side or the east side would be RO2. And Larry, was that were the neighbors who are from that residential area adjacent to that, were they okay then with the RO2 zoning opposed to B4?
Sorry, yeah, I think that the issue was on the Sunset side, and those subdivisions that touch that area. I don't think there was a lot of conversation about the RO2 on the other side.
I think the other side was B4 and the east side, which is next to the
RO2, yes.
RO2, but they seem to be okay with that zoning as opposed to when they wanted it B4.
No, I'd need to check. I mean, I need to check my notes on that, because I just remembered there was some concern about the way this was presented as it's written here.
Okay.
Larry or Pete, will there be staff present or on the call for the Thursday night meeting in reference to this particular request? And if so, I mean, will it be Preston or?
Yes,
speak
there will be,
about
there
that?
will be staff, and it'll either be Preston and or a song.
Okay.
It's going to be then our next meeting, which we'll need to make a decision what we'll do in June. Did the governor extend the electronic meetings through the end of June?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we'll all need to decide what we want to do, but I know the public input on that particular project is going to be important to them. We need to figure out a way that we can do it. I know they can send an email and we can address it, but I don't know, maybe there's some other creative way we can make sure that their voice is heard. I've received one call.
Have meeting sizes been increased? Have the meeting sizes been increased at all yet in regards to, I mean, because even though the electronic may still be able to be utilized until the end of June, if they've increased the meeting size, we could restrict the number of people that are in City Hall if we have actual in-person meetings.
Pete, yeah, the
So
governor.
is it still 10 or less, or?
50. I think he's bumping it up to 50 soon, but I don't know about meetings.
I'll need to double check.
So if it's
and I was
50
looking at recreation stuff today, and I really didn't look. I did have a fairly lengthy conversation with Elizabeth in Greenville, Bristol, and Kingsport today about what they're doing and what direction they're heading. Elizabeth in Bristol and Kingsport are still doing electronic meetings, and they have not made a decision as to when they're going to change and open things up further. The other, quite a lengthy conversation today about athletic events, parks and recreation, those types of things. Some of that's going to get opened up and some of it's not going to get opened up, it appears. So James Ellis has got a conference call tomorrow with about 6 or 8 different cities to talk amongst the park directors, and then the managers are going to get back together on Wednesday afternoon and see where we are at that point.
If I can interject just a second, planning commission that we held last week, we had public input, and we provided a phone number with the meeting number and password, and they called in and they were held in queue as Dr. Zients asked for public, and I let them in one at a time, and they stated their name and address and gave their public input that way.
Okay, and it worked pretty good.
Yeah, we had no problem. It was great.
Yeah, actually, I think people appreciated that. It did work okay.
On that topic, I think it would be worth our trying to queue up, because we do the plan of service, the annexation, and the appliement of the zone on a couple. Well, that's not on this one, but if we're going to have public input, I think it would be helpful to somehow introduce the relevant items and let that public in, rather than kind of calling people in and out to comment on the same topic. I'm thinking about the annexation 7, 1, 2, and 3.
Wouldn't that just be a matter of the mayor changing the how the schedule of events happen? I mean, you could do that, couldn't you?
Sure. Well, I need to ask
change the agenda,
because we call for public input on if it's the annexation, the plan of services, and zoning. Then we have public input on all 3. So I think, Joe, and I don't want to misinterpret what I thought you were saying, is that do we just have kind of one public input on that project?
That was
talk about
that was my thought,
because
I don't think most people who are coming to offer comment have laser focused their remarks such that they only deal with plan of service. They usually are kind of coming at it on a little broader level than that. And so I just know there have been occasions where we've had people at meetings who were ready to say something, and they'd get up on the first of the 3 items, and then we'd open up public comment on the second or the third, and they were sort of in the room trying to figure out, am I supposed to say those things again?
Right.
And so it just made me think there might be an opportunity to smooth that out.
So Pete, can we just say, does anyone have any comments on either the annexation, the zoning, or the plan of services?
Yes, ma'am, I think we can do that.
Okay, then that'll make it smoother, I'm sure. Instead of them coming in and out, if they wanted to speak on two of them, they can do it all at one time. Okay.
Yeah.
Good suggestion.
But that's not for this coming meeting, is that correct?
No, it'll be
Okay.
on second reading.
Okay.
Second reading. All right, are there any other needs that you have on any of these ordinances? Anything on second reading? I've lost
If I could,
my agenda, but go ahead.
you've got public hearing on both of the ordinances scheduled for second reading. So we can open it up as Wendy has suggested for public hearing on the Chestnut Cove subdivision rezoning, as well as the rezoning of the Ballard Health property.
Okay. Yeah, we can give it a shot then and see how it works.
Yes, ma'am.
And when will that other request for annexation across from the Ballard property, will that be at our next meeting on first? Larry,
It goes back to Planning Commission this month.
Okay, so we'll have to go through them first. Okay.
Yes, it's got to go back to planning. Is that correct, Commissioner Calhoun?
I'm not. That's one, that vote was positive 5-3 for annexation, I think.
Okay, I stand corrected. Then it will come June 4th.
Larry, I thought it got turned down. You're talking about the profit, right? Lynn Hodge,
Right.
didn't that get turned down?
No.
Okay. All right.
I know the reason it's not on this agenda. You all just met last week and the agenda stuff had to be to Beth last week. So
Right.
there wasn't time enough to turn it around. That's the reason it's not on this agenda.
Now, I mean, this is the one where it came to Planning Commission at the special call meeting. And the vote failed for annexation. And but then another motion was that we meet with a subcommittee, meet with the developer and the owner. And it come back to the Planning Commission, which occurred. And then a week later was a regular meeting, which was last week. And I think that the vote was, I think it was 5-3 in favor of the annexation.
Okay.
And then, of course, they knew that there's 3 readings in front of the city commission.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Anything else? Any other ordinances? Okay, is there anything anybody would like Pete to cover in his manager's report this month? We've been talking about the virus so much, I think we've missed out on some other things. Pete, we also have that CDBG recommendation that when is that going to come before the commission?
Thursday night. It's the last thing on your agenda. Yep.
Okay, so do we need to talk about that right now?
Be glad to if somebody's got questions about it.
Well, the request was over $700,000. The availability of funding is just a little over 300,000, 341, I think. So are you expecting us at that meeting to sit there and whittle down and make a decision on these requests?
Well, actually, we've made a recommendation that you all could just vote up or down.
Okay, I'm sorry, I haven't seen that. And my computer died, had my agenda on it, so.
Yeah, I do recall that it basically,
Under other-
some of the items are fully funded as requested, some are partially, and then some weren't funded at all. And I feel like there was an email either then or a subsequent email that spoke to the rationale, like here fund balance was sufficient to, there were some explanation of it. I think I can find that and email it to you.
Right here.
Pete, my
Yes.
question would be, I guess, there was a funding request for almost 200,000 from city schools food services, and the recommendation is 0 on that. is there, can you, spend a little time or explain that? I'm just curious.
Well, school food service has a very significant fund balance. And this is a program for them to continue summer feeding. And the other requests are from service providers that deal with the homeless and the folks that are going through the food banks and those types of things on a regular basis. Part of the school's request was $100,000 of labor. And the committee that was Bob and Preston and Richard McLean and Steve Freeman from over at the Housing Authority that deal with these CDBG funds all the time. And their recommendation was based on the fact that, it's hard to justify spending $100,000 on labor when the rest of these folks are delivering product to somebody in need or buying equipment that allows them to deliver product for somebody in need.
There's also
Here, I'm gonna put Bob on here. Bob was part of that.
Hey, Bob.
There's also the schools are also applying for a federal grant, and they were going to include some funding for food services. So with everything that Pete mentioned and the grant, we just felt that while it was, it's fair request, good request, that the other requests were just a higher need.
Sure.
A lot of those agencies don't really have much
And then
funding
I guess
source.
my second question. Right, I get it. And then I guess my second question is Manor House Fairview Housing. I mean, as far as like the allotments that y'all determined as far as your recommendation compared to Turning Point and Safe House or even Second Harvest and Salvation Army, is there a correlation to the number of people served, or how exactly? And there may not have been any science. It may just be, okay, here's what they asked for, here's what we can allocate that gets them across that finish line, or but anyways, I was just curious, like, because obviously we want to ROI on this to impact as many people as possible. So I'm just curious how, if there are a number of people affected tied to this as far as dollar amount received.
Yeah, John, what you're saying, I absolutely agree with, and Pete and Bob and I have all, what my position is on this. There's more flexibility in these CDBG funds, particularly. We can still use some unspent from this year's budget in a more flexible way that really kind of deals with people affected, with the virus. The new funding, the 341, Bob, correct me if I say this wrong, has some additional flexibility that we can invest in things that may help create some jobs or restoration of housing, or to our housing stock in those areas is very, very low, to do some other kinds of projects rather than just funding some of the agencies with the same things that they do over and over again. So that was just my whole thing of, if we look at this money holistically, what's the best use and how do you get the best return on it, so that it's really helping create some jobs and getting people, back on their feet and helping them move forward. And, in one of the proposals, they're going to buy a vacuum cleaner. Well, that to me is not the best and highest use of these very precious funds that we're getting the opportunity to be able to use differently than the way CDBG is usually used. So I just don't know how much that was looked at, Bob.
Well, it was looked at fairly in depth. There is more flexibility. That's true. Some of those small items for equipment, smaller equipment items, those were just things that agency needs as part of doing their job, and there is a relationship there. They were smaller items. That's why those were allowed. To go into the existing CDBG budget and pull out funds based on our budget for next year, which we're actually looking at making an amendment to, as we're going to present it, and we'll present that on first reading, there'll only be just under $23,000 in fund balance left at the end of the year. Now we're looking at making a recommendation to add $80,000 to acquire some properties on East Myrtle Street, directly across from the Langston, to purchase some properties to do some housing opportunities along there. One of those, there's 4 empty lots, and there's one with a very house that's getting pretty run down on. So that would address some housing needs, and it would help clean up and kind of be a booster shot for that Langston area, especially with all the work we've done there. We've left the money in to do the street work on there because that's really going to help clean up the area also. To pull other monies out, then we'll have to redo our budget for next year. So there's more opportunities, but we still have to be careful how we do that. It was a tough job. I mean, it's one of those cases you had more than twice as many funding requests as we had care dollars. We were just trying to get the most impact out there with that's going to hit the low and moderate folks to help them out. All those agencies, the Salvation Army, Manor House, Second Harvest, they're all struggling, and there's a lot of needs out there. That was just our recommendation on where we thought we could best use the money.
Okay,
I think it's great.
can this
for
money be
the
used for
recommendation.
any of that other stuff? That's the root question. This 313, what can that money be used for? Can it be used for housing rehab and land acquisition and that type of stuff? Or do we have to use a different pot of money for that?
I don't think it's intended for housing rehab. I mean, we've got money in housing rehab, and based on the contractors in this area and the amount of work they can do, you know, it's a challenge to always spend that money every year. We did recommend next year taking $30,000 of CDBG money and using that, recommended that be spent at the Salvation Army to convert some restrooms to outdoor showers for the homeless. So that was a response to trying to do some other good with that money that's beyond the care money.
I was
Well,
going to ask about those outdoor showers with Salvation Army. Exactly, how's that work? And maybe this, how do those get monitored? And maybe you don't know that because it's
that would
seems
be
risky.
that would be a better question answered by the Salvation Army. I can try to get some answers for you by Thursday. That was a need that they thought would help to have facilities so they could shower. When it says outside, it's not physically outside. I think it's a
Separate building.
separate building.
Sure, right.
Do we have very specific parameters on what we can do with this money? Are there guidelines?
There's a quick view that, Bob, I think you sent it. Go back and look at the emails that Bob sent last week on the CARE Act. And I think one of the enclosures had a quick view of the eligibility, what was eligible for these funds. I was just looking at it yesterday, in fact. And if not, I'll send it to you. I have it in my email file.
Okay, thank you.
But Bob,
Bob, were there other entities that requested funds?
All that's listed, that's the list of the ones that we've received. That's $750,000 from the 5 agencies.
And this appeared in the paper as a part of this HUD money. It had to appear in the paper, and there's so many days for public input on it. Is that correct?
That's correct. The CARE Act, normally it's a 30-day advertising period, but the CARE Act reduced that, to change that to 5 days.
Okay.
So
We don't-
to meet our time requirements, we had to
Okay,
do
we
that.
don't have to have input at our meeting, do we?
We don't have to, we might offer it, but I don't think it's required. I think that's what the 5-day period is, if we get written comments.
Okay, is this a
if-
is this a 3 reading,
No, ma'am.
just one time? Okay,
Yes.
all right.
And this also amends our annual action plan for this current year. And then they'll be bringing another plan for next year in June.
Okay, well, we know many of these agencies have really stepped forward. Good Sam and Salvation Army, and they've had a task force that I think's been really, really effective. And we know they've gone out and raised a lot of money to help, meet the needs. So, okay, that's good. Thank you.
Okay,
Is there
thank you.
anything else? Like I said, if you have anything you want Pete to address, just
I've
send him. John?
Real quick, I know we talked about gathering some info in sales tax. Is that going to be presented on Thursday, or was there a specific date that we were talking about doing that, Pete?
My
The
understanding
extra
is we were
25%.
going to do it this coming Thursday. And I suggested
Okay, that's what I
our
thought. I
meeting
just
last
wanted
time at 5 o'clock. So if 5 o'clock still works for everybody, I would recommend that we just talk about that at 5 prior to our start time at 6 for the regular commission agenda. And as soon as Sonny gets that information together, I'll make sure we ship it out to you all. It'll have a pretty detailed explanation as to the timing and the process it should have to go through for consideration.
So Pete, how do we handle the loop back to the school board following our workshop with them this past week? How did we end that? What are their tasks that they're going to be doing?
I don't know. They didn't ask for any additional money or Richard, Dr. Barnett. Yes. Dr. Bale's been gone for a while. They're saying they're $750,000 short. There's over $500,000 worth of salary increases in that $750,000. There's about $1.6 million of their challenge is health insurance increase. So, if they can figure out a way to move forward without additional money, that's what we have budgeted currently. If you make the decision that you want to give them additional money based on their current position, I would remind you of the maintenance of effort, that once you give them money, you're committed to giving them no less than that amount each recurring year. And I would, as I pointed out last Thursday, we all need to be very mindful that they are budgeting no reduction in sales tax next year. And if they don't collect the sales tax revenue that they have budgeted, then we have to make up the difference, as the policy is currently enforced by the state of Tennessee. And
even ahead of fund balance.
The current interpretation to your question is yes, that the maintenance of effort, the funding from the local funding agency cannot diminish. Now, there are a number of funding agencies in conversations with the governor's office and with the Department of Education to get a better interpretation of that policy and asking for some leniency in this very unusual economic time about the maintenance of effort requirements. It has been suggested by many that, probably much easier on the folks we work for, the citizens and the taxpayers, for schools to go to fund balance rather than raising property taxes or reducing other city services in order to get through, one real challenging economic budget year.
Sorry about that. Well, I think given all of the challenges that we're facing, budget wise and all, and understand this is not a meeting to vote on anything, but balanced budgets for all requesters coming into the city has to be top of mind. I noticed that the county is going to be calling for a 5% decrease in all their departments, and all agencies that normally receive money from them. So we have to be prepared for that second thing you were talking about there on the sales tax as well, Pete. So I just didn't know where the loop was going to go, if that was a formal request or just mentioning it.
I will talk to Dr. Barnett. I may call him here in a few minutes, because we've got to go to the paper with the budget ordinance this week in order, this weekend.
It'll be on Saturday.
In order for you all to have it before you for first reading on June the 4th. So we need to close that loop probably in the next 36 hours.
Agreed. Is that something, well, they really have not made a formal request, have they? Have they sent over an amended budget from what you originally received?
What I saw last Thursday is the only thing I've seen from them.
Why don't we let Pete talk to Dr. Burnett and report back so we kind of know where they think they left it?
If it is a formal request, then perhaps we should put it on the agenda for Thursday night so we have the opportunity to publicly have the discussion and act as need be.
Okay.
All right. Is there anything else?
Benny, it sounds like those birds are calling your name.
I know, between that and trucks going up and down the road here.
Yeah, are we going to talk about opening Little League? Are we going to talk about opening pools? I've got questions from 8 million people coming in. Since I used to coach Little League, all of them think I'm in charge of Little League getting it back open now. So
After reviewing carefully
That's a great
today,
point.
we cannot open up youth or adult sports yet. The governor has not authorized anybody to do that yet. So, and we've responded to the American Little League today that we know that that's subject to change sometime. And when it does, we'll act accordingly. But until he turns us loose, we can't do baseball. Or I saw in the paper where
June 1st.
the athletic directors are talking about
June
doing
1st.
things, and the way I read the executive orders, I'm not completely clear on how they're going to get there, because it says verbatim, no youth or adult sports activities. So
Yeah, that's really confusing to the public, Pete. And I think if the truth were known, activities are going on right now because people are interpreting, well, gosh, if everybody can go to Dollywood and to the Bristol Motor Speedway, those are bigger groups than what we would be having. And we've got all these plans for social distancing. We have protocols in place on how we're going to do this. So it's really confusing. And hopefully we'll get some better guidance than what's there. I read that recreation guidelines too. And that's, I mean, by the time I got to the bottom, I was more confused than I was when I started it.
it's we're bound to be compliant with the state's orders, and we want to get things open as quick as anybody else, but we're bound to follow the state's guidance and direction. And we've also got liability issues. If we get out in front of what the governor allows, then I think we open ourselves up to potential litigation if somebody should get sick as a result or perceived to get sick as a result of an activity that we have allowed beyond what the governor allows. But like I said earlier, the recreation staff's working hard on getting plans in place and coordinating with seeing what everybody else is doing in terms of best practices. And, you know, when we get the okay from the state, then we'll open things up. And I will tell you, it may not be the day that they open things up because we have no labor in place right now. And we're beginning the process of trying to find the part-time labor that we'll need to operate facilities. And I'll remind you that the vast majority of our part-time labor comes from ETSU students. So we're not sure at this point the availability of labor. And in talking to James Ellis today, I think there are some other cities that are also somewhat struggling with finding part-time labor to work this summer. Not being critical of anyone or anything, but it's kind of hard to entice people to come to work for $10 an hour when you're eligible to draw $700 to stay home and draw unemployment. It's going to be, it could be a little challenging, but we're starting to work through it, and I assure you we will move quickly when allowed to.
Okay. Anything else, folks? All right, if not, we will see everybody Thursday night at 5 on Zoom, right? 5 o'clock?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We'll be home.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.